Hello and welcome to nasscom Studio. We are at the Technology and Leadership Forum 2023, and I have with me Anu Acharya. She's the CEO and founder of Mapmygenome. Thank you so much, Anu, for speaking with us. How do you see the landscape having changed for women in technology over the last few years?
So I think one is that I think it has become a lot more mainstream than it was before. I think there have been many more role models to say. And I think as a result, I think we are seeing there are a lot more people who are coming in and not just in corporate, but also in entrepreneurship as well. So I think certainly we are seeing that change, and in tech, it's a much easier thing to be able to actually prove and create models, and therefore we are starting to see many more women coming up in the technology space.
Why do you say it's easier?
In the sense that it's not about getting it into, there is not that much capital investment, right? And I think the bigger challenge that women face is more in the terms of funding. So if you don't need that much of capital investment upfront, it becomes easier to be able to do that with a slightly smaller bit of investment, right? If you're just looking at it as a tech-based model. If you're looking at something that requires a lot more upfront, like in some of the deep tech cases, in our case, for instance, there is a need for building some infrastructure and all of that. But if you're looking at saying, do I need to develop an app? Do I need to develop something which is more, I need a computer, I need my brain, and I can prove myself, right? You create a prototype, and then you can go and be able to create a small set of market. Now, if you want to expand that bigger, you need to make sure that there is a lot more on the funding that currently is still not yet where we would like it to be.
And do you think people these days are more open to women entrepreneurs, to women taking more risk?
So I think it depends. First, we should stop using the word woman entrepreneur, right? Because I think that puts us in a different category altogether. We are, ultimately we are building products or services, and therefore either we call male entrepreneurs or
just entrepreneurs.
I'm saying that if you also call male entrepreneur, then I'm okay being called a woman entrepreneur. Otherwise I'm an entrepreneur and I should be addressed as such. But I think it is about, when you look at it from a product perspective, consumers don't care, right? Whether it is a woman who started the business or not. I think many of us don't know the products that we buy, and it is fine. Again, I think question of who accepts. I think there is no problem in people who are working for you to accept you as a leader. I don't think that's a big challenge. I think there are still some challenges because there are some of them more unconscious biases that are there, which not everybody has recognized and made sure that we are able to understand and therefore tackle the problem. So I think the first challenge that anyone will face would be to say, do we understand that there is some sort of an unconscious or a conscious bias that is going on in the system? And if there is, then what are the steps that you need to do? So I think there are definitely, I think a lot more has been done in terms of inclusiveness and bringing in that, being more open to these ideas. But at the same time, I think there are still many steps that we need to take to be able to, get rid of it from our ecosystem. And I think, starting with recognizing where those problems start off with could be, one is categorization. Two is making sure that, we measure both in terms of saying that do we highlight it from aggregate data rather than take individual cases and make it more anecdotal. And I think that's somehow happens more often for women than not, right? So I think there is a need to be able to get real data and use data as a reason for making those changes.
But is it happening? Because if you see globally, most of the tech leaders are men. What stops women from scaling these heights?
So it's not, I think the two things, right? One, I think whether we are, as a community, we are able to raise our hands, if you will, to say that we want to be there. And that's number one, most important, that whether women are wanting to get to that level. And that's a choice that they're making, right? Whether you want to be a leader or not want to be a leader, that's a personal choice and people decide to do that. The second part is is the ecosystem good enough for you to be able to reach or scale those heights? And I think we still have a few, many more things to do to make it a lot more conducive to women scaling those heights. Because again, I think a big challenge is a lot of times we look at data that comes anecdotally, and I think that forms the basis of a lot of prejudices that are formed. So I think if we are looking at it from a clear, pure, can I take this, blind the data, let AI make some of those decisions, whether it's on promotions or not, maybe we'll get a better response, right? And I think that's where it is, because otherwise it either looks like, in some cases, that these are forced inclusions, and forced doesn't work. I think what works is if we are able to show that these are actually making a difference, and having more women in leadership makes a big difference. I think that becomes an automatic reason for people to be able to do that, right? Rather than saying, do I have this checklist of making sure that is there? And I think that is unfortunate, because that sort of feels to other people as something that is taken away from them, right? Instead of saying something that is rightfully for women or for everybody who's actually getting there, I think it always looks like something stolen from somebody else. And I think when we project it that way, it becomes harder to actually make those changes.
What do you think are the opportunities of emerging technologies in a field like healthcare? Given that we just are coming out of a pandemic, do you think these emerging technologies will help us better prepare for the next pandemic?
Theoretically, yes. So, and I think that we saw that when this pandemic hit, we did see a rise of a lot of changes, and some of those have actually become intrinsic, which is a good thing, right? So I think it's the fact that we are able to, a lot more people know how to, for instance, scan a QR code and eat everywhere, is an example of how it's just become natural for us to be able to do that. It's a habit. So these are things, small little things that have sort of permeated in our day-to-day life, and I think that makes a difference even in healthcare, right? So one is because change of behavior is the harder part of it. It is absolutely doable, but it takes time to do. A pandemic sort of pushed us in that direction, and we all were able to do it. Now, whether we sustain those efforts is a good question. I think today, if you go to an airport, you see that people are still without a mask. People still don't care. People have gone back to normal living, right? What is good thing is that some of those connections that when required, for instance, saying, can I now figure out a way how to make these, put pieces of like government, industry, academia together? I think those networks became stronger. And I think that is essential for healthcare, because in healthcare, one of the biggest challenges is how do you get access to different kinds of people? If I'm in industry, can I get access to in academia? Can I get access to government and things like that? We worked with, I worked with academics, worked with, the government, and we were able to come up with studies. We were able to come up with things that otherwise I would not have done, right? So I think one is that it forced us to think differently. And it helped us to create like things like INSACOG, which is the consortium that DBT started, where you're able to understand which strain of the virus is there and so on. So I think those are things that are there now. They're not going away, right? Similarly, if you use that same thing, whether it was the way foundations like Gates Foundation and others put in capital to sort of bring us to a point where we are able to use data to predict and other things, I think those are systems that are there for us to use. But the emerging technologies that we can do right now is, one, can we get people to understand that health is something that they can choose to be there? How do you choose to make sure that you are healthy, right? And I think, for instance, a lot of things that we did at Mapmygenome, we started this 10 years ago. We told people that you can choose to be healthy, you can stay younger and
So you're saying
healthier.
they have control on their health, and it's not
Absolutely.
My health is in the doctor's hand.
It's not. So your health is totally in your own hand. I mean, not that the doctor is not necessary, but I think the doctor doesn't eat your food, the doctor doesn't exercise, right? What doctor does is doctor is a guide, right? Similarly, I think when you look at something like what we do in Mapmygenome, we take your swab, we help you understand. And ultimately, who does it? It's the consumer or the person who does it, right? If I want to stay healthy, There are two things two things in my control, right? I can eat based, I can do the right kind of fitness things. Or you wait till you fall sick and you go to the doctor. Doctor gives you a pill. You think you're okay, but it's killing your other systems also, right?
But this is what people do.
Yes.
So while you mentioned that because of the pandemic, habits have changed, do you think Indian customers are open to adopting emerging technologies? Because they're still rooted in their old beliefs that, if I fall sick, I'll go to the doctor, he'll give me a pill, I'll get better. Uh, are people accepting these technologies? Is that important for, the technology to grow in our country?
Oh, absolutely. We are seeing, like, for instance, a lot of nutritionists, for instance, now are seeing increased number of people walking into their clinics, and they are using newer tools, right? So they use nutrigenomics, for instance, to be able to reverse things like fatty liver disease. They're looking at how do you reverse diabetes and all of that, right? So these technologies are being adopted, not just by doctors, but also by consumers. And I think we see that consumers buy online, they are able to get information over there. So it's not just about things like genomics. Genomics is one example. The other example, for instance, one of the other things that we are doing is microbiome, right? You want to understand what's actually going on in your gut. Because when it comes to health, we tend to lie a lot, right? When a doctor says, kya khate ho aap? Or what do you eat? You tell things that you remember which are good. You don't tell what actually you've eaten, right? You've forgotten about all those little things that you should, but if you look at what is happening in your gut microbiome, it will clearly tell this is what kind of food you've been eating and this is the effect of it on that. So I think there are many technologies that are there today, whether it is in terms of saying, can I use a glucose monitor to understand what's going on with my glucose when I eat something, whether it is about understanding, how do you get your data from your wearables, whether it is understanding of, can I make a consult with the doctor online? Those are things that we got used to during the pandemic. And I think that's information, that's data that comes in. And ultimately, if we are able to bring it such that people are able to use that data effectively in a more normal, routine way, then it becomes where everybody else will be able to have access to that. And we're starting to see that because I think they're seeing their neighbors, their colleagues, and their friends do it. They lose weight, they look better, they look fitter, and so I think as a result, I think people want to be looking better and feeling better, and I think that's a great first place to start with for health.
All right, thank you so much, Anu, for speaking with us, and let's hope if people are just keeping up with the journalists, they do improve their health. Let's hope that happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.